Welcome to 5 in the Bin, where my guests suggest 5 aspects of rugby league that they would like to see out of the game. This week's guest, Michael Carbone of the Chasing Kangaroos podcast. Welcome to the first episode of 5 in the Bin. I'm Oliver from Rugby League, in my opinion, and it is an honour to introduce my first guest, Michael Carbone from the Chasing Kangaroos podcast. Carbs, how are you tonight, my friend?
Mate, I'm okay. I just watched my Dragons get shellacked by the Bulldogs, so I'm not happy about that. I'm honoured to be your first guest, and that puts a bit of pressure on me. So, yeah, hopefully I go okay.
Well, I tell you what, guys, I must apologise in advance because we tried to get the biggest tiger on. However, he wasn't available, so we had to settle for Carbs instead. But Big T, if you're listening, I'd love to get you on sometime. Obviously a joke. It's amazing to have you on, my friend. How is Big T? You said you just recorded an intro with him just before this. So how is the biggest tiger?
Yeah, he's great, man. He's always happy. I always say he's probably the nicest guy in rugby league circles that I ever met. And I know you were joking, but there's a bit of truth in every joke, and I'm sure he would be more than happy to join you on this podcast as well. But he's great. We just recorded an intro for our show, Chasing Kangaroos. So the way that works is we try and have an interview each week. This episode is one with Petro Sivanasiva, and he's talking to us about the Cavite Silktails, a new club in Fiji that's trying to make their way through the New South Wales Cup. And so we recorded an intro for that show, and we ended up going a little bit over time. So sorry, I'm a bit late, Ollie, but man, it's good to be speaking to you.
Mate, that's fine. Hopefully this first episode goes well. Yeah. But just on it's the Cavite Silktails, isn't it?
That's right.
The Fijian side. They've recently announced Wes Nagama, is it, as their head coach? Former, I know he retired as a Penrith Panther. Of course, his brother Kevin is currently the Fijian captain.
Yeah,
I believe so.
Yeah, so Wes will be the coach. He's played NRL Super League, and he's obviously represented the Fiji party as well with great passion. So I think he'll do a good job.
Yeah, awesome. Just before we get started, I was having to think today. Now, we've been mates for a while. We're in regular contact, I would say. We've had a drink together at the Nines last year at Bank West, but I believe this is actually the first time we've ever collaborated on something. I just assumed that we had before, but when I had to think about it, I think this is the first time, so we'll have to see if we've got that chemistry.
I think it is. Hey, have we ever appeared on a different podcast together or anything like that? I'm sure there had to be something. But
see, I don't think so, because it's weird, because we've met in person, which I haven't met many people I've collaborated with in person. Probably I've met everyone. Well, I've met pretty much most people who I've collaborated with at that weekend.
Yeah.
At the World Nines. But yeah, man, like I just couldn't think of anything. So as I said, hopefully we've got that good on air chemistry, and people want to come back after this one. Hopefully I'm an all right host.
Mate, you'll kill it. You're doing a great job. And, mate, if this is the first time, hopefully it's the first of many.
Okay, well, with that being said, we better get stuck into it, Carbs. So I asked you to prepare 5 aspects of the game that you just want to see out. I think I've ripped this off. I ripped it off. I think there was like an old British TV show. It might not be old, but I think it's been cancelled by now. I can't think of the name of it, where they'd bring in 5 topics and they'd put it in the trash or something. Can't quite think of what it is, but this is a rugby league version. 5 in the bin. These are 5, as I said, aspects or 5 things to do with rugby league, anything at all that you just want to see out in the bin. What's your first piece of trash, we'll call it?
Okay, I'm going to start small, because we'll get into some really big stuff. Because you know me, I'm all about expansion and stuff like that, so you can probably guess some things. But I'll start small. One of them is the lack of atmosphere at a game, and not being able to make noise at a game. And I know at the moment it doesn't matter because none of us can really go to a game during COVID-19. Hopefully that changes soon. But I've been to games, Ollie, where I'll stand up and cheer because my team's about to score a try, and some old bloke behind me will tell me to sit down and shut up because he's trying to watch the footy.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, you should have stayed home and watched it on TV. So I want to trash that whole culture. I want people singing and chanting like they do in the Premier League at NRL games. And yeah, I want a vibe. So I want to trash that one, mate. That quiet atmosphere culture that we seem to have at footy games.
I agree 100%. I know over here in Australia, a lot of people do trash on the Hyundai A-League. You know, they're a bit smaller than your big two, the AFL, the NRL, even cricket. But the one thing they do have, I've been to a few A-League games and a couple of Sydney derbies too, which it's a bit hard to compare those because those are just far and away just amazing. But I've been to a couple of games where the crowds have probably been, I'd say, as big as your general NRL game. However, you know, the fan bases, the ultras, as they're called, for each club, you know, they're singing, they're dancing, the drums are out, and it just sort of enhances the game a little bit. Even if it isn't a very entertaining game, the fans sort of enhance it. So I'd like to see that a bit more in rugby league. I know personally at Penrith, in the Panthers' den, they do, you know, they have the trumpet and I think they have a drum, and but it's purely just the Penrith chant, right, that you get for most teams. So there is that. However, I would like to see, you know, more original chants, songs, and people just having fun. So I have to agree completely. That has to go into the bin. I guess the lack of atmosphere from fans at the games.
Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
I was going to say too, and it is hard because like soccer is a different sport. Like soccer's a beautiful game, and there's long periods of time where to someone like me that's not a massive soccer fan, it looks like nothing is really happening, but it's just this beautiful flow in the game, you know, if you're a big fan. But that means that you can sing and chant during a soccer game without sort of being interrupted. Whereas in footy, in rugby league, you know, I've heard chants go up, but then they stop because there's a big hit or a big break, or there's always stuff going on. So it's hard to develop that atmosphere. But they do it well in the Super League, man. So, you know, who's to say we can't have it here as well?
Yeah, and a shout out to the Tongan supporters as well, who, you know, generally you hear at Tongan games, they sing their hymns, and it just enhances that atmosphere. I know it's not quite jumping up, singing and dancing and chanting, but it just enhances the game, and I think I'm all for that. I don't necessarily think we could replicate, you know, soccer or football in the sense, as you're right, the game is played a lot different, so there's less opportunity to sing and dance and stuff like that. However, I feel like we could potentially come up with our own thing, come up with our own way of showing active fan support, I'll call it. So did you have anything else you wanted to add on that topic?
No, let's go to the next one, man.
Let's go to the next one. What is your second piece of trash?
Okay, so for me, this is one of the big ones I was talking about. So it's the season structure, the NRL season structure, right? Like, because anyone that listens to my show, anyone that knows me, knows that I'm an expansionist, I'm an internationalist. So the international game and growing the international game is very important for me. And I don't think with the NRL season, as long as it is, we get to do that. So I would prefer, if you indulge me for a sec, I won't go into too much detail, Ollie, but I would prefer to have a 22-round NRL season, 11 rounds, the first half at the start, uninterrupted, then 3 or 4 weeks of solid rep rugby league right in the middle. So you have your state of origin, you have New Zealand, Tonga, you have Fiji versus PNG, you have England versus France, you have Samoa versus Lebanon, you have whatever you want, but you have 4 weeks of just massive representative rugby league right in the middle of that NRL competition, and then the NRL season kicks off again, kind of the way it did this year. We had a break because of COVID, and there was such a great build-up for the competition restarting. You can have that every year, have the second half, the 11 games leading into the finals after that rep round or that rep month. And then at the end of the year, you have your Oceania Cups and your Euro Cups and your World Cups and whatever you want as well. But really, like, breaking it down in that way, having time for international rugby league and growing the game, I think. So for me, like, long seasons is straight in the bin.
I'm all for that too. Just on this rep period you're talking about in the middle of the season, is there a worry that Origin would sort of overshadow the representative games? I guess what I'm trying to work out is, would the Origin games take place on the Wednesday, then on the weekend you have, you know, your France, Lebanon, New Zealand, Samoa, Tonga, Fiji, PNG. I could go on, England. Is it international games on the weekend, Origin during the week? And do you think there is the potential for Origin to sort of overshadow the internationals? What's your thoughts on that?
So I think firstly, yes, like Origin Wednesdays and then have the international games on the weekend. Like, there's no doubt, like Origin is the best form of rugby league. Like, I won't say it's the pinnacle, because I think playing for your country should be the pinnacle, not playing for your state. But there's no doubt that the level and quality of rugby league at state of origin level is better than anything else we have currently. So in that sense, it might overshadow things at first, but it depends where you are as well, right? So, and what I mean by that is, we can build up New Zealand versus Tonga to be as big as state of origin in New Zealand and Tonga. And, someone in Christchurch or Wellington might care more about a built-up New Zealand versus Tonga series than they do about state of origin. And if you're like us living in Sydney, well, not like us, because I'd love New Zealand versus Tonga as much as Origin personally. But if you're like a typical NRL fan living in Sydney or Brisbane or something like that, then of course Origin's going to be like, it will not be overshadowed for you. So I think we just need to think less about the Sydney and Brisbane markets and think about everyone else as well. The other important thing there is to make sure that, if Fiji are playing Papua New Guinea, for example, then those games are being played in Port Moresby and Suva, not in Campbelltown. So this is the way we need to be thinking if we want to make sure that Origin doesn't overshadow the international games that happen during a hypothetical rep month like that.
I love it, 100%. I was a bit sceptical because I'll admit I was thinking of that Sydney, Brisbane sort of mainstream rugby league market, I guess you could say. But, the international games, they're not necessarily for that market all the time. And you know what? The people in Sydney and Brisbane, they'll watch the games on their TV at home. It's not like they're not going to watch the game, so they will. So, I'm all for it. I would love to see games in a place like Suva and Port Moresby as well. I feel like Papua New Guinea, if Papua New Guinea is playing someone, I believe it was mid-season. I know it can be hard, but last year I think it was at Campbelltown. It might have been Fiji they were up against, I think. It was played at Campbelltown.
Fiji played Papua New Guinea at Leichhardt Oval last year. The year before was at Campbelltown, so you're not getting confused or anything. That's true.
Yeah, my apologies, but for both of those games, you put it at Port Moresby, you get a sellout crowd. I know it's a bit hard because the NRL likes to schedule it mid-season and they like to have that as the curtain raiser, generally for a Tonga versus Samoa or as a part of a triple threat, right? But even if you put all three games over at Port Moresby and just had PNG play last, I'm sure you'd pretty much have a full house for the majority of the day. So I'm all for that. And you know what? We'll have to put these longer seasons, I'd say, in the bin specifically for that. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, man, I think we've covered all of that. But yeah, we've got to think bigger. We've got to think bigger than we do.
Think bigger. I love it. On to your third piece of trash.
Okay, so speaking of thinking bigger, it's the rules, right, in general. Because, and I'm not saying I know people have issues with things, and I'm not here to nitpick, like, should we have a 7-tackle restart after a kick goes dead or anything like that. But what I'm talking about is making sure the rules in our game as a whole are the same no matter where it's being played. So what I mean by that, like, if you're watching Super League or you're watching International Rugby League or you're watching NRL, there are slightly different variations to the rules.
Yeah.
A good example is this, like the 6 again, instead of a penalty, which I think has been fantastic.
Yeah.
And they are talking about having that in international footy and in Super League as well. But I just think there needs to be more, I guess, consolidation or at least discussion by all the major parties in the rugby league world. So IRL, RFL, NRL or ARLC, and make sure that if the rules are changing for one, that everyone agrees to it and everyone's doing it, so that we're playing the same sport all around the world. And I know it's not a massive thing, but it's just something that kind of annoys me. So I'd like to throw, I don't know what you'd even call that, I'd like to throw different rules for every part of the world in the bin.
Yeah, so you'd like to see a more uniform rule set, which is very understandable. I'd say, you look overseas at, we'll go back to soccer again because, soccer other than rugby league is probably, a bit more of a world game. Even rugby as well, I'd say, unless you're playing sevens, for the majority, it's a uniform rule set. Sometimes a new rule will be introduced in a league a bit earlier than another one, but generally by the next season, it'll be in there. I just want to get your thoughts. So the 6 again rule, it's worked great in the NRL so far.
Yeah.
Now, I don't watch a whole lot of Super League. I must admit, I'm trying to get into it more, especially since I've been interviewing a couple of Super League players and players who have played there. When I've spoken to them, the main difference they say between the NRL and the Super League is that the Super League is a much more attacking competition, a much more attacking league. And, Super League players who want to come over to the NRL one day or something, when I've spoken to them, they've said that, the main thing that they want to work on is their defence.
Yep.
Because it's a much more defensive game. Do you think if the 6 again rule is introduced in the Super League, there's the potential for overkill? Because the one sort of gripe people have had with the 6 again rule so far is that, they believe it leads to blowouts. Now, I need to see the 6 again rule a bit more. I'd say there have been a few blowouts, I'd say, this season, since the season has resumed. But for a league that's already heavily attack-based, do you think that could be a bit of overkill introducing the 6 again rule in the Super League?
Look, possibly. It's hard to say. You're right. Like, Super League is more attack-based because I guess there's less structure in defence over there, and players tend to sort of hang off ball players. So that's why you see guys like Blake Austin and Hastings go over there. And while they're like average or above average players in the NRL, they absolutely kill it in Super League because they seem to have so much more room to move. It's for that reason. With the 6 again rule, like at the time of recording, like this chat, we've seen two full rounds with this 6 again rule in place. So it could go a couple of ways. Like, one way is it could turn into touch football, run and dump really fast. Like, it could get even faster. If that happens, I don't like it. Like, I don't think that's good for the game. But what could also happen is these blowouts you're getting is because players are just sort of coming back. They've had technically they've had another off season. Some players and teams are more well suited to this rule than others. So I think towards the end of the season, we're going to see less of this. Like, once a side gets ahead, they can't be run down because of the 6 again rule. We're going to see less of that as the other teams start to sort of get used to it and get better at it. So I'm kind of hoping it goes that way. With Super League, you might have more blowout scores, and it might open it up even more and make it even more entertaining as well. But I do think I'd like to see it over there as well, especially if we're going to have it over here.
Yeah, well, I was just having a quick think as I was actually explaining, the Super League, how it is a bit more of an attack-based league. Because of that, the 6 again rule, if it is introduced, might not have the same impact as it does in the NRL.
Potentially.
Because it might not be used as often because we don't see as much wrestle in the ruck as we do in the NRL. So, it could be introduced, but it might not impact the game the same way as it has in the NRL. So when you look at it that way, it has the potential to work. Anyway, do you have anything else to say about your third piece of trash?
Nah, man. Let's throw it in the bin.
Let's throw it in the bin, and we'll start rumbling up, scrumpling up. Piece of trash number 4.
Okay, this one is half a joke, but I'm half serious about it as well.
That's fine.
All right, it's going to piss people off, but remember, I'm a salty St. George Illawarra Dragons fan, so I want to throw the Cronulla Sharks in the bin. All right, there's no need for this club. Sorry to the fans of the Cronulla Sharks, but you are surrounded by St. George Illawarra. We can take that area over, and the Sharks should relocate to Perth or just disappear completely. So, sort of a joke, but I'm kind of serious, man. So,
I have to give a shout out to someone right now, one of my more active followers, Jacob Thompson, young Jacob, who messaged me earlier today. Now, he said he is looking forward to the interview with you, Cubs, because he actually suggested a little while ago when I said I might have been, getting guests on for this five in the bin thing, and that I was thinking of doing something with the podcast. He said a bunch of names that, he messaged me. He's like, I'd love to see get this guy, this guy, this guy. You were on that list. Now, Jacob is an avid Cronulla Sharks supporter, so I don't know how this will go down with young Jacob. I hope he doesn't listen up until this point. But anyway, Carbs, would you like to elaborate a little bit more on why you'd like to see, the Dragons' arch rivals, their local rivals, out of the competition?
Mate, firstly, I'll say sorry, Jacob, mate. I hope I didn't hurt your feelings. But you're more than welcome to switch over to the Dragons if the Sharks were thrown into the bin. We have no issue with that. We'll take over the area. We're happy with that. But for me, it goes back. And again, like I say, I'm half joking. I don't want to see any clubs die. But it does go back to the fact that the Sharks were introduced to sort of to hurt the all-conquering St. George Dragons back in that 11 premiership in a row period. They were successful in doing that. We haven't been very successful since the Sharks were introduced. And I just think now the way the game is going, like I said, I'm an expansionist. I do believe that 9 clubs in Sydney is too much. I do believe that we should try and spread out a little bit. As I've sort of said, let's think big. But in saying that, I don't want to see the NRL killing off clubs for the sake of it as well. So there's a fine line, there's a balance. I'm not sure exactly how that happens, but I'm who knows? Maybe there'll be a merger one day. Who knows?
Possibly. I know personally that a lot of fans probably would be against mergers. However, do you see much merit in the Sharks possibly moving to a place like Perth? I know a lot of people on my page have suggested that when talking about relocating or getting rid of Sydney clubs. You are in the majority there. A lot of people do say the Sharks or the Tigers, and they don't say to dissolve them completely. Their suggestion, is to move them to Perth. Could you see that being a possibility for the Sharks?
It's a huge question, right? And you got to look at it like with decisions like that. You got to remember it's a business decision. It's not necessarily an emotional decision, right? So, for example, and I'll start with this, like I am a St. George Illawarra Dragons fan. I'm from the St. George side of the merger, right? But if the club did the research, decided that it was best for the team to be solely based in the Illawarra South Coast region and it was going to be better and that was the way forward for the club, yada, 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 I could get behind that, right?
Yeah.
In the same way, if I was a Sharks fan and the club decided that, hey, we're sort of struggling in the Cronulla-Sutherland region, there's not much room for us to grow in terms of corporate dollars, we're always going to be like an okay club and occasionally have a good season. But if we move to Perth, all of a sudden, we're a one-city club, we can develop some juniors, we've got all the corporate dollars on that side of Australia, et cetera, et cetera. We could be like a mini Melbourne Storm or a mini Brisbane Broncos. Then that's kind of like, that's attractive from a business perspective. So like I said, if I'm a Cronulla Sharks fan, I'd be okay with supporting, like back in the Super League war days, there was talk about St. George possibly having to relocate to Melbourne and be the Melbourne Dragons. And it never came about. And I don't know if it was ever serious, but, at the end of the day, I would still support my club no matter where they are because they've been a part of me my entire life. I don't remember not supporting the Dragons. I still support them despite how crap they currently are and whatever issues they're having. I still support them and I still love them and as hard as it can be. So I would, if I'm a Cronulla Sharks fan and it was the best thing for my club to move to Perth, I'd be okay with that. So, yeah, I know a lot of people disagree with me on that, but it's just my opinion.
Well, as you said, man, you are an expansionist, so I understand that. Just my thinking here, you were talking about the Dragons becoming like solely that South Coast Illawarra-based club.
Yep.
I personally wouldn't mind it. I think if the Sharks were ever to dissolve or move over to Perth, I think that's when you pull the trigger on the Dragons becoming primarily that South Coast-based club because the supporter base becomes that bit bigger, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I know the Dragons have probably got that stronghold on the South Coast already, but it just make it even stronger. You're talking, Albion Park, Wollongong, that Illawarra area, that entire South Coast area, Kiama, I believe as well. Yeah, it's already pretty Dragons crazy, I'd say.
It really
I'd
is.
say,
yeah.
I'd say they've got the stronghold on it. But I think that would be the time to sort of base them there primarily, which they already sort of are, but they do tend to play a few games at Cogra still each year.
Yeah.
I'd say if the Sharks moved, you limit that even further, but that's just my opinion.
No, I agree, man. I think, like, I see with the St. George brand, I see it as a brand that has potential beyond geographic boundaries, like we're used to in rugby league, especially in Sydney. So, like, I would piss everyone off, call it the St. George Dragons, play every game in Wollongong, and just take over the south of Sydney all the way down the south coast. Like, and I'm sure some people would be annoyed with that at first, on both sides, but I think from a brand perspective and in the long run, like, it would be the best thing to do. But again, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, well, I remember growing up, right, probably up until I was, just hitting high school, whatever, I used to think Cogra was a ground in, like, Wollongong. I
really?
always used to think, I knew that it was weird, I knew that the Dragons and Illawarra merged, but I thought they were both South Coast-based clubs. Like, I've always had the impression that the Dragons were a South Coast-based club, and I think, I don't know, one day I was watching a game and I was, chatting to my dad or something, must have been, and I was like, where actually is this Cogra place? And it's in Sydney, and I was like, oh, the Dragons, it makes sense, that merger now, like, they were a Sydney-based club, and that's why, because a lot of people, say that the Dragons are a Sydney-based club, and I used to think, no, I've been to Wollongong before. It's a couple of hours south of Sydney, thank you very much, but yeah, I never used to know, so I guess that sort of ties into that St. George brand where it can go beyond borders.
Yeah,
right?
I think so.
Yeah, anything else to add on that? I believe it's your fourth offering.
No,
just the Cronulla Sharks.
Just a shout out to Jacob. Hope you're well, man. Didn't mean to hurt your feelings, but yeah, I'm just mucking around sort of as well. Yeah. So yeah, hope we're cool, bro.
Well, anyway, this is it. The last piece of trash. We're going to take it out. It's bin day. What is it? Your final offering.
Okay, so this is one, again, I think people are going to disagree with me on stuff, but if they really think about it, they'll agree, I reckon, if they put a lot of thought into it. But this is one that I thought about a couple of weeks ago, more so than ever. And with the NRL being the only sport, like English-speaking sport around the world that's kind of live and on TV at the moment, there was a lot of talk a few weeks ago about pushing into like North America and Rugby League being on in the early hours of the morning on one of their main like sports channels, and people watching it over there in the States and in Canada and places like that. And I've seen a lot of debate and controversy about how Americans in particular, or people from outside of like traditional rugby league areas, call it rugby. So they don't understand in most cases that there's two rugby codes. They don't call it league or footy like we do. They call it rugby, or they call it Australian rugby or whatever. And a lot of us, like Aussies, and a lot of people in the UK get the shits with this. Like, especially if you see it on social media, they'll say, "No, we're not rugby. We're league. We're better than rugby." Blah 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 blah. I'm sort of like, I hate seeing that, like, because at the end of the day, we are a code of rugby. Like, so it makes sense for people in America, for example, to call rugby league rugby. Like, league is not league is like a competition that is formed that comes together over there, right?
Yep.
It's not, they don't understand the difference. And whatever they call it, like, I just think if you were American, right? So, Ollie, if you're hypothetical, say you're American, you live in New York, you discover this game. It's Australian rugby. It's the NRL. You discover it. You wake up early one night, you're flicking the channels, and you're like, this is mad. Like, this is awesome. I want to watch more of this. And you jump online and you're on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, and you're talking about this Australian rugby, and all of a sudden 50 Aussies jumped on your Twitter feed and told you off because it's not rugby, it's league, or it's footy, or blah, 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 whatever you want to say, I would be turned off. Like, I would say, you know what? It's not worth it. I don't care about this sport anymore. The fans are annoying. And so I want to throw in the bin, like, bashing, like, people from all over the world. Like, let them call our sport whatever they want, as long as they're watching it, as long as they're finding it. And who knows, if enough of them like it and watch it and follow it, rugby league might eventually become the rugby code around the world.
And I tell you what, if there are Americans and people from other countries that start watching the game, you'd think if they're calling it rugby to start off with, they'll hear the commentators, they'll hear the people on TV referring to it as league, and possibly just, oh, okay, they call it league, right?
Yeah.
So you'd think that'd be a natural thing anyway. To further back you up, here's an interesting tidbit for you. Every English Super League or Championship player I've interviewed to this point calls it rugby.
Correct. Yeah. If you're from Northern England, you say rugby and you mean league. If you're from the south of England, if you're from London, for example, you say rugby, you mean union. It depends on where you're from. So it's really just us Aussies, not even Aussies. It's New South Wales and Queensland that don't call it rugby. We're like the only ones, and it's kind of weird. But you're right, man, and you're right. You have been speaking to a lot of Super League players, so you would see that on a daily basis.
Yeah, well, even I was listening to Oliver Gildart's new podcast the other day, the Offload podcast. He had Zach Hardacre on. They were calling it rugby too, and that's something I noticed. So I thought, if in the place where rugby league was created, and I know us Aussies like to think, oh, it's the Australian game because it's over here. No, it was invented over in England. If they're calling it rugby, then you can say rugby or league. For me personally, I don't mind. And you know what? I even have mates who are predominantly football/soccer fans, right? They've called it rugby before as well.
Yeah.
Some of them can't tell the difference. And I guess it's sort of a similar debate to football or soccer. Yeah. The term soccer was created in England. So I'm not sure if you knew that.
No, I didn't know that at all.
Yeah, the term soccer was coined in England, and it's sort of, I don't know how it got out to the States or something, but I just heard. I didn't really research into it. Apparently it was coined in England. But it's a similar argument to that. At the end of the day, who cares? As long as they're watching the product, as long as they're enjoying the product, and as I said before, eventually, if they're fans enough, if they become fans quick enough over time, they will learn that we generally call it league, and they'll probably jump onto that. It's not called the Rugby in America podcast with Nate Gladden. It's called the Rugby League in America podcast. So if he can pick up on it, then I think we'll be sweet. But definitely, let's get that in the bin. As long as we're watching the game of rugby or league, I think that's fine. Anything else you wanted to add for that final piece of trash?
Two quick things. So, like on my podcast, on Chasing Kangaroos, because I speak to people from all over the world, I have a rule. If you can call it rugby, league, footy, NRL, whatever you want to call it, that's all rugby league. If you want to talk about the other code, it's called union. So that's how I differentiate on my show, right? That's one thing. The second thing is I spoke to Eric Perez. We had Eric Perez on the show a few weeks ago. So for anyone that doesn't know who he is, he was the founder of the Toronto Wolfpack, and he's now founded a new club called the Ottawa Aces, who are trying to do the same thing that Toronto Wolfpack did, which is climb all the way up to Super League. And he'll start more clubs in the future in Canada, I'm sure. He said to me that when he first started the Canadian Rugby League, in 2012, I think it was, so before he started the Wolfpack, everyone thought that this Canadian Rugby League was a league of the rugby union sport, right? But now, fast forward 8 years, and Rugby League is the rugby that you hear about in Canada, especially in Ontario, in Toronto and Ottawa, for example. So, there are, depending on where you're from, there's a chance to own the term. And I think rugby league fans, over the last 100 years, it's a damn shame that we sort of lost the opportunity to own the term rugby, because that's what the sport is originally called. And it kind of sucks that we don't get to own that. And it's nice to see that in some places that the fans do. So that's kind of cool. I hope that makes sense, what I'm trying to explain.
Definitely, man. And I hope that we can sort of gain a bit more ground on that rugby term. Because as he said, I think, I was listening to your podcast with the president. I wanted to say that. Yep. I just wanted to say it. I was listening to your podcast with Eric Perez, and from how he was talking, it seems like, as you said, in Toronto at least, rugby is rugby league. The Wolfpack, from what I've seen as an outsider, it seems like the Toronto Wolfpack are being respected and are getting that mainstream media attention over in Canada. Now, obviously, they're not a Toronto Maple Leafs, a Toronto Blue Jays, for example, but they're sort of respected on their level. Like, okay, cool, this is our team. They're representing us in this rugby sport, and they're getting behind them, which is great. And you know what? With Ottawa coming in, that'll slowly bleed into the rest of Canada. I'm not saying that rugby league is going to be the national sport over there or anything, but you know what? They could be a viable alternative, and you know what? That's fine with me, as long as there is an interest and it's viable over there, which it seems like it is. And it's a blueprint for places like New York, for places in America or in different countries to sort of follow. So
what I'll say as well, Ollie, sorry to interrupt, but there are people listening to this now that are calling me an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. Like there are people that disagree 110%. And I used to be one of those people. But I will say to those people, like, have a think about it from the whole. Think big picture. Like we sort of said a couple of times during this interview, have a think about it, and you might start to see the other side. And I was once like you. So, yeah, all good.
Well, I couldn't have ended it on a better place there. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Michael Carbone from the Chasing Kangaroos podcast. He has just given 5 aspects of the game of rugby league he would like to see in the bin to make the game better overall. Carbs, I'll hand it over to you for the send-off. Please plug anything you want. Doesn't even have to be Chasing Kangaroos related. You can plug anything.
No, man, just like anyone that wants to follow Chasing Kangaroos, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, check us out on Apple or wherever you listen to your podcast as well. But all good. I'm not too concerned about that. Like a lot of your fans probably do listen to us as well. So that's really cool. Hats off to you guys. Thank you so much for supporting the show and what we're trying to do. But all I say, man, Ollie, keep doing what you're doing, man. I'm loving watching all these new interviews that you're getting and having for Everything Rugby League. So it's been awesome watching you grow, man. Like, you're doing an incredible job. And I'll have a chat to Big T and see if you can get him on the show as well next time.
Well, I'll tell you what, that'd be awesome. Thank you so much for the kind words, Michael Carbone, and thank you for listening at home. I'll see you next week.